What up, guys? Jeff Tucker here from MACkite. We're excited to bring you 2025 F1's MIDI lineup. They've added some things to their lineup that we're excited about. We've had a chance to ride them briefly, a little bit, and we're just going to kind of do a little overview about the options in the exciting up-and-coming market of the mid-boards, mid-length boards, which is kind of, in my opinion, going to start dominating the market, especially for those of you who are looking for a second board, or even those of you who've been in the market, been in the sport for a while, riding. These boards can offer a lot of performance and a lot of crossover to what you can do.
Yeah, and mid-length is such a broad term. It's cool to see that F1's taking it seriously. I mean, more than half of their lineup now is mid-length, essentially. But it also makes it harder to pick a board. You're like, hey, I'm an F1 guy. I'm going to buy their mid-length. Well, you got 3 choices. They're all unique. They all have reasons why you would pick one or the other.
And some of them have crossover, though, depending on your skill set.
There is quite a bit of crossover, too. It's like you could ride, a small one of these or a bigger one of these, and a lot of the benefits going to be the same. So we'll talk through some of the differences, and you can figure out what gets the neurons pumping.
There's 3 of them we're going to cover today. The first one is the Rocket. We've got it right here in front of us.
Yeah, so this is the Rocket Surf Prone mid-length. What's the official name on it? Too many words.
Surf.
Rocket Surf, but that's a pre-production. This is prone mid-length, I think is what they're going to call it. And this one is a little narrower, a little lower volume, a little thinner.
It's 18 by 5'8".
This will be your high-performance ripper. Definitely a higher level of expertise required for winging or for para-winging. But for prone surfing or foil driving, this is going to be kind of your easier option without departing too much into a wingy kind of a shape. So,
agree.
Basically a surf shape, but it's elongated for more efficiency, easier paddling, better stability front to back.
And because of its length, you can ride a smaller foil.
Yep. For
proning. And even if you were to, we haven't discussed really using this board for foil drive, but has some limitations with its track box length. But this board, obviously, like you mentioned briefly, depending on your skill set, you could wing it. It is a little narrow, but I have winged boards similar to this shape, which we'll go into in some other videos, that surprisingly, despite this being around 57 liters, because of its length, definitely has some performance benefits to get up on foil and get up to speed.
Yeah, and I forget, what size is this one? So this is 5'8", 57 liters. Yep. I had no problem winging this board.
No.
It's a little narrow for my taste, with the pad especially, I would say. I might bump up a size if I really wanted a universal one board does it all, but for good conditions, this board is a ripper. So easy to get on foil. I mean, I would compare it to a 65 to 70 liter mid-length in terms of ease of use getting on foil.
And I've ridden other
lighter wins than you think.
Yep, and I've ridden other brands that are coming out with this design. You don't want to focus on the liters. It says 57, and a lot of guys and gals can be like intimidated by that. Like you said, it rides bigger, and once you get the nose up and you get speed, it's amazing the efficiency that this board shape. Again, I agree with you, maybe a little narrow for being an ideal winging, but they didn't create that for this in mind. But yes, it's definitely a shape that you want to look at the length. And again, at 5'8", anything that's over that 5'6" to 5'10" or 5'11", we're going to start seeing a lot of boards in that mid-range that have, surprisingly, for if you're a first-time buyer, is going to feel like 15 to 20 liters more of board you normally ride.
Yeah, you'll hear us say this over and over again in these mid-length videos, but do your best to turn off the literage.
Yes.
It doesn't matter, and it does a little bit, but realistically, your length, your rocker line, the shape of the board, the width of the board is a lot more important in these kind of boards than literage. Literage is an indicator of flotation, but when you have just a little bit of power in your sail, flotation doesn't matter. It's all about planing ability. It's all about efficiency. And these boards really give you a lot of planing length, very low entry rocker, super efficient, and they will help you get up on smaller foils more easily. As long as you just have a little shred of wind, you have just enough to kind of get you moving. That's all you need to get the board planing. So yeah, if you're not riding in like, we'll say 14 knots or under, it's a non-issue. So you'll hear us say that again and again, but do your best. You might be on a 100-liter board right now. When you're transitioning to this, you're going to be on a 50, 60-liter board. It's not that big of a jump. So keep that in mind.
Yep.
Some features on this one before we transfer next. Got a little bit of a sunken deck area here, real flat through the stance area, a little kick in the tail, little bulb in the nose just to shed some water there, but you know, pretty clean setup here. The pad, as we mentioned, is a little short if you're riding to wider foils. If you have a wider stance or big feet, you might want to put a little extra strip of pad here. That's something that I nitpick about personally.
Me too.
But you know, realistically, this board isn't designed to ride, you know, 1,400 centimeter wide foils, so you don't necessarily need it if you're riding it with appropriate foils. Jeff mentioned the foil box for foil drive. Personally, I think it's a non-issue because of the length of the board. Really where the long tracks make a lot of sense for foil driving is if you're on a short board and you really need to slam that thing to the tail. Otherwise, if you're riding really off the wall foils, some foils like to be mounted way far forward. Some of the old Armstrong stuff, for instance. Some of the foils like to be mounted way back. Some of the really old Axis stuff, for instance. But nowadays, most foils like to ride pretty much underneath your back foot. This does that perfectly. It's a really neutral position of the box, I would say. Works with 95% of the foils in the market today. So for most people, it shouldn't be an issue. Definitely focus more on your length, your width, something that's appropriate for you, where you're at, the kind of conditions you're riding, the foils that you're riding. If you're riding smaller foils, you want a longer board foil driving. Same thing for winging with a little less power. The longer, narrower construction is really going to help you speed up and get those foils moving a lot easier.
A small thing, but I think is very nice, is this little pad, this little sticky pad that comes on the bottom of the board.
And they're doing it on all their boards.
Yeah. So
appropriate areas depending on the shape.
Yeah, that way you can tip it upside down in the parking lot, or if you're on a hard surface and you don't ding the front of your board.
Wish all the brands would do that.
Yeah, I mean,
at least give you a little patch of you know,
I'm telling you, it's a small thing, but it's really nice.
Everybody's nose is scratched up.
And a lot of people have no idea what this is because it comes.
Yeah, let me get it off of here. No, leave it.
It comes taped to the underside of the board, and you peel it off and stick it. You want to stick it at the highest point of the board when it's down. So
yeah, and we're always getting samples, I guess, so they're pre-applied. But
all right, what do we got up here next?
All right, so next we'll step up, go to something a little bigger, a little bit more stable.
One that I've ridden.
What we got here is the Rocket Crossover. So this is a crossover board between kind of the prony kind of stuff, the surfy kind of boards, the winging boards. It also crosses over really well into Parawing, or in the really big sizes, even SUP, because this has a huge range of sizes. Basically what it is it's the Rocket Wing S elongated and offered in a lot more sizes, especially the larger sizes. So if you love that Wing S and you're like, man, I wish it was a little longer, or I wish I could get it a little bigger, F1 has answered your call.
To me, wingers out there, this is a no-brainer if you're looking to get into the mid-range board, and you want a board that has a wide range of performance. When I say the word performance, I mean from getting up in some lighter wind to charging in some higher wind and doing some potential wave riding. I don't think there's a ton of drawbacks with this MIDI compared to the next MIDI we'll talk about. I'm a fan of the Rocket S board that they've had for years. I felt they were a little ahead of the game with the length to volume, where they were a little longer. I think this just takes it, like you said, stretches that board out. They call it the Wing S. And I had a chance to ride this, and
yeah, so this one's called the Crossover. There are other surfier boards called the Wing S for surf.
So this
one's mislabeled again. It's a sample pre-production, but this board is definitely like the everyman's wing board. This could be a one board quiver for most people when you're picking the appropriate size. It's also a great board for anyone that's on a bigger size board that wants to size down and gain a lot of performance without sacrificing stability, ease of use, and light wind ability, as you mentioned. You can size this down 20 to 30 liters versus normal wing boards.
Yeah, let's put some
and you're going to have the same kind of low end performance, same kind of stability. And where that comes is the length, number one. Length is your biggest friend when you're talking about ease of use, light wind riding. Width, bringing it in a little bit, it does remove a little bit of stability side to side, but it's really easy to adjust side to side. We're used to doing that as humans. Front to back, not so much as easy, but it's wide enough to be stable, but also narrow enough to be more efficient to get those rails out of the way in hard turns. It's just almost a seamless, progression.
Yep.
If you're like, oh, you're on a 120 liter board, jump on a 90 liter, bam, you're off and riding, no problem.
Yep, and to put some numbers to that, because this is that crossover board that's kind of in the middle, we're looking at a board that's around 22 wide. This is an 80 liter that is 5'6".
Yep.
So it's crossover. It's kind of in that middle. It's not really long and more closer to 19, that 18, 19, 20 range.
Yeah, not super narrow like these other two
boards.
Yep.
This gives you a little bit more width, around 22. The only drawback to that is obviously it may not get up to speed quite as fast, obviously because it's a little wider, but you are going to have that more stability. And as you said, give you that more at-home feel if you're on a larger board already, around a 90, 100 liter board, and you drop down in liters. Again, we're talking about length here. This is longer at 5'6". So this really fits nicely. And when I rode it the first time, felt right at home. I like the Rocket S 70 liter, which kind of been my go-to. But when I got on this board, I saw where the one board quiver, you could use this in light wind, 13, 14 knots, depending on your skill set and the wings you have, foils you ride. But I think it really fits that niche right in the middle market with good performance.
Yeah, I agree. I think they nailed the width to length ratio on these, and the volume is just right. They're thick enough, but not too thick. They're long enough, not too long. They're wide enough, not too wide, not too narrow. And for your average intermediate rider or even advanced rider riding a little underpowered, this fits that perfect speed range, right? You don't need something long and narrow like this to achieve those fast board on water speeds. Your foil is going to lift before that. You're riding a 1,000 to 1,400 centimeter foil. That fits perfect with this ratio of length and width. The width is going to help you plane up more quickly. The narrowness is going to help you build that speed more efficiently, in the length as well. So it fits that size foil perfectly. Not to say that you can't ride smaller foils on this or bigger foils on this, but there has been kind of a gap, right? It's like if you're on a 2,000 foil, you're on a big, fat, chunky board, that jives well. If you're on a little tiny fast foil and a really narrow fast board, that jives well. But what about the in-between? That's where 90% of people are. Mm-hmm. That's where they're gonna stay a lot of times for a long time. So having a board like this that fits that middle ground for those middle of the road, knee-high to head-high waves, 10 to 25 miles an hour wind, that's where most people live, and this is the kind of board they should be riding for.
Yep. So obviously the market, there's a lot of options out there, a lot of different sizes, and the mid is kind of exploding. But in the F1 lineup for 2025, again, give me the name of this. It's not the Wing S. This
Crossover.
Is Crossover.
Rocket Crossover
is the one board that I can be assured, as I talk to customers to sell as a one board quiver, you won't be disappointed.
Yeah, one of the most versatile boards in our shop. I could grab this size, I can go wing it, light wind. I could go wing it in high winds. Yep. I could go do jumps with this. I could go ride waves. I can para-wing with this. I can prone foil with this. I can foil drive with this.
That's because you're tough.
I could kite foil with this.
You can do it all.
It works for everything. It's such like a middle ground. The dimensions are so refined. This thing is going to be a huge hit this year. I think it'll be one of our best-selling inline boards.
Agreed.
Because it is just that next level board. If you've done the basics, get an appropriate size, this is it.
Easy. Well, let's jump to our last one in the mid-range.
Yeah, so this one, I think, adds some complication for people.
Well, we're here to help with that.
Kind of between the crossover and the prone mid. That is the wing mid, so Rocket mid length is the official name here. This one's 95 liters, 6'2" by 20, but quite thick, 5 3/4. So this one, I would say, is for your intermediate plus in light winds when you want to be able to get up in the lowest possible wind, or if you want to ride the smallest possible foil for the given wind.
I think you nailed it. If we go back a year or two now, we came up with a downwind board, which is much longer.
Yeah, and those are
for light
easier.
wind.
Yeah.
But I think this shape right here is really more wing specific for light wind.
Yep.
So not to say that the downwind boards don't have a place still and they still have their spot, but I think if you want to add a little performance in your light wind riding, this shape would be the choice for you.
Yeah.
And I've spent a considerable amount of time on this board, and from the other brands we sell in this size, it's been a really popular board size and shape for a lot of our local guys that are now ready for their next board, and they want a board that can really get them through the light winds in the summer, and yet when it starts to pick up, and we're not talking about monster winds here, but it's starting to pick up into the low 20s and get a small wave, this board still feels a board you can manage and control, versus when you get in the downwind boards and you're starting to get in the higher winds and waves, it can be a lot to deal with unless you're just pointing and going.
Yeah, if you're not riding downwind, especially if you're riding swell that isn't straight downwind, if it's side shore or offshore and you're riding into that wind, these are going to get blown around a lot more, just like the downwind boards.
So that's where this shape right here, the difference between this board and this board is this one really has a wide range of wind that you can definitely take it to the lower end, ride smaller foil, which is something that, again, a lot of our customers are, as they progress and get better, it really, riding that smaller foil that you can ride in the wind condition really enhances your experience on the water, with the speed and the efficiency. And that's where this board comes into play to help get you up to speed and on foil in lighter winds and have that experience.
Yeah, ultralight winds. This board kind of breaks the mold in terms of our rules for mid-lengths, because it's stretching out to the point where it's almost a downwind board. So what I would suggest, if you're looking at ultralight wind riding with the minimum possible power in your sail and smaller foils, you want to size up on this. You want to be at your normal mid-length or normal traditional board volume, or maybe even more. A lot of times, light winds, I'm in 70, 80 liters. On this, 95 is great for me in ultralight winds. It's more of a downwind sizing than it is a mid-length sizing, where I might be on a 50 or 60 liter. And that's because this is light wind oriented. You actually use the volume here. You need to be able to float on this board with no power in your sail to keep the board at the surface of the water for the maximum yield on the low end. Now, if you don't care so much about riding in under 10 knots, you can size this board down quite a bit. The problem there is you're going to start getting narrower and narrower as you do that. And if you look at this board, even at the 95 liter size, it's pretty narrow. This pad doesn't come to the edge here. So again, you might want to put some wax there. You might want to extend the pad if you really want more purchase on this board for wider foils, which a lot of times you're riding in light wind. But personally, this one is a very super light wind machine for me. If I'm not riding super light wind, I'm going to be on this or this. I was going to say, if you're starting to make this board, be more of a, your higher wind board, is kind of crossing back into, you want to get maybe in the crossover. This is one of a two board quiver is the way I look at it.
Agree.
Unless you're on an inland lake and you always need something that's hyper efficient and you're not really ripping turns on waves and you're not doing jumps, this could be a one board quiver for that. But for people that are doing more technical kind of riding, that have consistent wind, this is a light wind kind of machine.
And I would say, though, depending on your skill level, the sport is relatively new still, and there's a lot of guys that aren't, yet going into really big waves and charging wind over 25 knots. This could be your one board for a while for someone who's on their second board.
Especially for riding a lot of lighter winds.
Yeah, and getting into lighter winds, but this board isn't limited. I feel comfortable on 18, 19 knots on this board, but again, I think as you start to get in the higher winds and the smaller foils, that's where this would fit in, I think, a little better for you. But definitely, as I kind of started off with this board, I think it's getting more wing specific from the downwind board size.
And even the bigger size, there's guys that'll use this as a downwind or a sup foil. So there's that, or
More
even
skill.
prone downwind. This is a great prone downwind board.
For skill sets, if you have that skill
But this
set.
one out of the group is a little bit more focused in light wind, should be ridden bigger. Downside to riding this is a one board quiver. It's a little longer than it needs to be for that. It's a little thicker than what a lot of people are going to want for maximum performance. But like you said, you know, it can work for a lot of different ways, especially if you're beginner intermediate level. You can definitely stretch this out a bit further. I've para-winged on this board in light wind. It was fantastic. Cruising around, riding waves. I wasn't too upset at it. But I also didn't ask too much of the board at that time.
So there you have it. I think it's exciting to see, you know, what different brands are coming out here with the MIDI range and giving some options within that. Hopefully this helped clarify a little bit. You know, we're here to help too. You know, if you have questions, or, you know, after watching this, give us a call. We'll be happy to kind of talk through, one, your skill level, where you're at in the sport. Two, what kind of wind are you trying to ride in the most to get out of your boards. You know, we're not trying to tell you that you need to buy 2 of these or have 3 boards in your quiver. But I think that, you know, with the different options, it's really about getting you the right size, the right board to maximize your time in the water and fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's cool to have all the options. It can also be confusing. So we'll recap real quick. Light wind or small foil rodding, underpowered. Every bit, every day, every man.
One board. Do
everything kind of a board. You know, it's not going to get foils, tiny foils on foil quite as early as this, but pretty close. It's not going to ride quite as light, extra crazy light wind, 5-6 knots.
It can take more skill to do what this board will be on this one.
Yeah, I would say so. You know, if you're a budding intermediate, this is probably your choice in one of the slightly larger sizes. But if you're looking for maximum surf performance, riding tiny foils, lightest, fastest, most aggressive, that is your prone mid.
And can be wingable.
Totally wingable. Yep, totally wingable, para-wingable. You know, if you know what you're doing, you could potentially ride this as a one board quiver, pending you're not riding in ultralight winds.
Yeah, below 14 knots.
Something to consider.
15.
Maybe you prone that on the light days, and then once it hits 14, 15, you go wing it.
Or foil drive a little bit with it.
Yeah, foil drive, epic board for foil drive. So there you have it. Those are some of the different models, some of our initial little nitpicks and things like that. But overall, F1 quality construction, design as you'd expect. They always are hitting it out of the park, it seems like, every year. So it's such a reliable brand for high quality product and performance. So I'm always really excited to see their new stuff, and this year's no exception.
Great shapes and designs. So there you have it. It's been Jeff and Tucker here. If you have any questions, hit us up, give us a call, send us an email, give us a chat. Enjoy the stoke.